Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining the ACA Small Business Bootcamp and Resource Collective on this Tuesday morning, October 27th. Can't believe it's going by so fast. We're already in October. Sometimes it's going by fast, sometimes it's not going by fast, but thank you for joining us. We're excited to have you here. I'm Robert Theobald, the Small Business Ombudsman and Vice President of Small Business Services here at the Arizona Commerce Authority. And we want to start by first thanking our community partners. We cannot do these boot camps without them. Today's boot camp is by one of our community partners, is the University of Arizona, as is every boot camp is by our community partners. We're excited to have Joe with the University of Arizona here today. We'll get to him here shortly, but as we go through these initial introductions, I want to first start by also saying that the Small Business Boot Camp is designed for small businesses to work through the COVID crisis and return stronger than ever. It is a statewide initiative supported by our community partners throughout the state. And we're going to continue the boot camp through December and into 2021, providing great resources for small businesses. The Small Business Boot Camp and Resource Collective website is a great resource to access all the information from the boot camps we've done. We're in our 27th week of boot camps. We've done over 90 sessions, and all those previous sessions can be found on our website. The same website you used to register for this session, you can go back and view the previous sessions. And this session will also be recorded and posted later today to go back and review. But all those sessions and their resources and the slide decks are shared, so small businesses can review those, again, gain that information, watch them when they have the time to do that. So it's a great tool. Additionally, on that same site, you'll find the link to our Resource Collective. And the Resource Collective is a compilation of the tools and resources and guides that our community partners have provided to help small businesses work through the crisis and return back to business and reopen. This is just a sample of some of the guides that are available. You can see there's guides ranging from unemployment insurance to reopening your restaurant, guidance for barbershops and cosmetologists, construction, industry safety, Oh, did I cut out?
Yes, you cut out, Robert.
Oh, wow. I've got to...
And I got kicked out myself and then rejoined. So I'm not sure if it's a Zoom issue or...
Yeah.
Well, let me go back. Where was I at on the slides?
Resource Collective.
Okay. So we've got the Resource Collective. Part of the Resource Collective is this list of guides and resources available to all the businesses out there, ranging from reopening guides, unemployment insurance, salons, barbershops, manufacturing, construction, a lot of great tools that are available. Additionally, we want to share some updates. These are fairly urgent updates because these grant programs end at the end of the month. So Florence, Phoenix, Tempe, and Surprise all have small business grant programs available. And most of those four, the application periods end at the end of this week. Additionally, the Better Business Bureau Empower Main Street Accelerator is a great resource, and their application period is open to become part of that accelerator, and is for Main Street small businesses. And that is open through the end of this week as well. So if you're interested in participating in that accelerator, you can apply for it at bbbempower.com. By the end of the week. So additionally, through our Arizona Business Resources website for COVID-19, you can find all the updates related to business items for small and large businesses for Arizona. It is a great tool, both related to workforce and to financial resources and general updates. We constantly update that website as new information comes out. So take a look at it. Some other programs that the ACA has to help support small businesses is our small business services through the SBA, SBDC, work with local banks, and other resources that may be helpful for your business. Our workforce division as well can help with if you're looking to hire employees or do some training or upskilling, they have programs to help support that. And then our Arizona MEP is the Manufacturing Extension Partnership, and they can help match manufacturers with their COVID-19 needs, or emergency planning, or adjusting and working on lean programs as well. So they're a great resource for all the manufacturers out there. Additionally, at this time, a lot of people are looking to start side gigs or start their own business. And as part of Small Business Services, we have our Small Business Checklist, and it's an interactive online resource that can help guide people looking to start a business or to pivot and adjust with new product lines to identify the commonly requested licensing, registration, compliance items that may be needed at both at all levels, whether it's local, state, federal levels. So a great tool to help identify what you need to do to get your business started. We also wanted just a quick mention for the state's COVID-19 information and resource page, arizonatogether.org. A lot of great information there. I believe they've had over 100,000 views through the COVID crisis thus far. A lot of traffic going there. So this week we have two great topics for leadership, looking into wrapping up this year and going strong into 2021. Today we have Return Stronger into the new year with Joe Carella from the University of Arizona. And then on Thursday, we have How to Craft a Compelling Company Vision with Chris Spear from Traction Point. And so two great sessions, two great experts in their field. So we're excited to have them. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and let Joe do his introduction. I'm going to turn the time over to Joe, and he can do a quick introduction of himself and then get started with his presentation.
Well, thank you, Robert. I appreciate it. My introduction is going to be very brief. I work at University of Arizona. I'm responsible for executive education. That means essentially short courses for people who are interested in learning more and don't feel that the learning ended when they finished college. The area of expertise and the area of research that I do is around decision making and the thinking that goes behind it. I'm interested in how our brain processes information and how we make decisions, and then how we use it to drive our organization and work with others. So I will be sharing with you some of my research, some of the learning that I've had through these past few months working with executives like you. And as a bit of a background, I have a little bit of a global expertise in the sense that I have worked and lived on 3 continents. So I will be sharing my perspective on how that impacts us when it comes to the current pandemic. So give me 1 second and I'll share my deck. You always think that you're going to just do this faster than you actually do. And after all this time, you think that I'd be more proficient at that, but it still takes me a little bit to upload presentations. Can you guys see it?
Yeah, Joe, it looks good.
Perfect. So when Robert contacted me and we had a brief conversation on what the topic could be, we both agreed that one of the opportunities and challenges that exists for all of us is that we're entering the holiday season. And with that, there is a lot that can go right and a lot that can go wrong. This is a different period from others, from other years. And in that sense, I think it's critical to think of it in a slightly different way. So what I'd like you to take away from the session today is that we're surrounded by turbulence. I'm sure that you're all experiencing it, and many of us thought that by this point in the fall, we would have had a vaccine, we would have found ways of mitigating the pandemic. But the reality is that it's a little bit more complicated. And irrespective of where you stand in this, whether we should reopen everything or whether we should be more cautious, irrespective of that, we cannot get away from the fact that turbulence is around us and we need to be able to deal with it. The part that it's not so good is that our brain does not like it, does not like turbulence. Our brain, in fact, enjoys anything that it's continuously repeated. And I'll talk more about that. And in fact, our brain is a little bit of a lazy bum in that, given that it likes to see things in a continuous fashion where things are stable, where we can utilize our expertise again and again, stress is good in the sense that it motivates us, but it's a little bit of a frenemy in that at the same time, too much stress is not good for us. And we'll talk more about that. My final point, and what I hope that you will get out of the session is that there is, in fact, there are ways to manage turbulence. And I'll give you some tools that I think are good, both for you personally, but also with your team. And so I'll look at both how you can manage turbulence, and if you're responsible for a team, if you have a company that you're responsible for, ways to help your team manage turbulence. These 2 months that you have ahead of you are the perfect time to take stock, to reflect, to think through how to prepare for next year. And I've made this offer before. Lisa and Robert know this about me. If you want to reach out to me independently, the University of Arizona is a land grant organization. So my desire is to help our community. So feel free to reach out if you want to have a private conversation. At the end of the presentation, I will have my email address so you can reach out to me directly. Let me move on to the next slide. I'd like you to help me with this. And so for those of you that are on that are able to access the chat, I would like you to first of all answer this question: where are turbulence and chaos originating from for you? And I'm curious specifically for you. For some of you, for example, turbulence could be caused by the fact that you cannot reopen, that there are limitations, that there are challenges with your physical presence and the ability to connect with clients. For others, it may be the fact that there are challenges around your clients not being able to reopen. For others, it could be the availability of funds. Whatever it may be, I would like to hear from you in the chat and see what you guys come up with. The other question that I would like you to also try and answer is, how do you cope with it today? What is your way of managing the turbulence? There are both good ways to cope and not so good ways. Good ways, for example, is doing some sports, trying to release some of the tension. Not so good ways, which, by the way, no judgment placed on any one of you. I have my own good ways and my own bad ways. Is, for example, what I do sometimes, which is to resort to junk food to kind of stop a craving, or to kind of get myself some quick sugar so that I can plow through some work that I need to get done and that stresses me out. So there's both good ways and both not so good ways. So I'd love to see, if you don't mind sharing in the chat, some thoughts around this. And let me see, I see some. Let's see what you got. We'll just wait a few seconds, and if I don't get anything from you, I'll tell you. Turbulence, kids' school, absolutely, Robert. You're absolutely right. I think that for many of us at a very personal level, having to figure out how to manage both home and work life can be profoundly stressful. Having to reassign, for example, responsibilities with work. Robert, I'm going to come with you on a long motorcycle ride. It sounds like a really good idea. Anywhere, any mechanisms that we can use to have our brain disconnect from the stress can be a good motivator for then being able to perform better and to return stronger. Excellent. And anime, I take a walk and sit in nature. Having the space for our brain to create different neural pathways, and I'll talk a little bit more about that, is a great way to then allow for our brain to stay elastic, to stay agile, to create essentially what is sometimes called neuroplasticity, where we are able to make better connections. Let me start by shifting gears a little bit and putting some context into where we're at. Some of you may have heard this concept. It's called VUCA, and we live in a VUCA world. VUCA is an acronym that was created in the 1980s by the US Army War College. And essentially, it happened at a time when there were signs that not all was well in the Soviet Union, and the United States was trying to figure out, the US government was trying to figure out what was the environment that was going to emerge out of the potential collapse of the Soviet Union. And what the US Army War College came up with was this idea of VUCA, V-U-C-A, essentially saying there's going to be volatility, there's going to be uncertainty, there's going to be complexity, and there's going to be ambiguity. Well, all of that VUCA world from a political perspective has ultimately trickled down into our business world. And it's done so because we have found ourselves all of a sudden not being necessarily aligned with one economic model, whether it was communism or capitalism, but because all of a sudden we have a variety of actors who are not necessarily aligned with one or the other. So our world went from being, quite frankly, bipolar, essentially having two major systems, to in fact becoming multipolar. Bear with me, because this may seem like an abstract concept, but it has profound implications into what is happening today. And in a way, it's very straightforward. I can point to one simple fact. Had China, for example, not taken such a big stance and decided to exit the Soviet sphere and started to then, for example, make demands to become part of the World Trade Organization and then become the economic engine that it is today, maybe the pandemic would have not been so profoundly disruptive as it is today. You can kind of go back to a series of steps. And maybe there could be a different pandemic. This is not to say that China should have stayed where it's at. It's a reflection on the fact that our world has evolved and it's become a lot more interconnected, which creates much larger ripples in our daily life. And so for those of you, for example, that think that we should be looking at the pandemic and just take a stance where we reopen everything and forget what's happening, while I appreciate that perspective and I can see why we would want to do that, I also want you to think about the fact that ultimately we live in a world in which our economies are so intertwined that there are ripple effects whether we like it or not. And so even if the United States decided to take a different stance on things, our supply chains are so globally interconnected that inevitably disruption in supply chains in Southeast Asia or in Europe end up having an impact on our economy here. So when we look at this VUCA concept, I want you to think about the fact that I want you to just accept the fact that we live in it and that we should understand it as opposed to reject it. Because the more we understand it, the more likely it is that we're able to manage it and cope with it. So let's take a look and see what volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity translate into the world that we live in. Volatility essentially means we live in a world that it's a lot more, where changes are happening more often than before, and where we really need to be spending time to understand why that is happening. This volatility is not casual. It's not something that came out of nowhere. It has some origins, and also it has some patterns to it. Uncertainty. We can't really do a good job of predicting things. I'm sure that most of you can see the difference between, say, the 1980s and today when it comes to uncertainty. Uncertainty in the 1980s was maybe the fact that the president was going to change and that there were going to be tweaks in the way in which economic policy would be pursued. But pretty much we lived in fairly stable environments where day to day we would not see this roller coaster that we see today. Part of it, it's actually because of complexity. There is a lot more complexity in our life than there was back in the 1980s. For starters, the cycles of business are much quicker than they used to be. And technology, while it has simplified our lives, in many ways it has complicated our lives too. So complexity is really also the result of all these factors that inevitably we need to consider when we're making decisions. And we live in times of ambiguity. Part of it is the volatility that we live in, and part of it is the uncertainty, which makes it difficult to decipher what's going on, and things do not appear as clear as they used to. Plus, in an environment with so many new variables, past experience and what we've done in the past may not necessarily help us in making sense of what's going to happen next. So I know that for many of you, the big question is, can we ever, when is it that we will get out of this? When is it that we will be on the other side of all this VUCA world of the pandemic? And it's a natural desire and a natural question to ask. My suggestion to you is that we are unlikely to ever go back to a simpler world. There's way more of us on this planet. There are more opportunities for connection, for tension, for threats, but also for rewards. And let me tell you a little bit about how our brain works. Because our brain, we like to think of our brain as like this one machine that operates in kind of in conjunction with our body and determines what we do. We like to think of ourselves as rational human beings. The reality is that if we kind of simplify things a little bit, there are three parts to our brain. There's one part, which is the computer part. This computer part is essentially our repository of all of our experiences, our memories, the stuff that we've accumulated over time. And over time, that translates into a couple of things. One part is the values and the things that we espouse. the stuff that it's important to us, that kind of defines how we look at the world. The other part is the, I call it the autopilot. It's essentially the part of your brain that lets you do things without you even having to consciously connect with things. An example of that is when you're driving to work. How often have you driven to work and not even thought how you got there? You get to work and you go, wow, you know, I was just so lost in thought that I did not even think about how I was getting to work. That's your autopilot. That's the part of the brain that says, I've got this. I don't need you to use unnecessary energy. Because our brain consumes a lot of energy. Even though it's only 4% of the total body mass, it consumes 20% of energy. So imagine having to kind of consume a lot of energy all the time, even for basic stuff like driving to work. Our brain does not like to do that. As I was mentioning earlier, our brain is a little bit lazy. There is one other part to our brain, and that's the monkey brain, or sometimes called the chimp brain. The chimp brain has to do with our feelings and our emotions. It's one of the more ancient parts of our brain. It's the part that is connected with things like fight, flight, freeze, where we respond instinctively to what is happening around us by looking at very basic instincts that we have, i.e., how do we protect ourselves? How do we survive? And then there is the human brain. The human brain is the most sophisticated part of our brain. It's the one that gets us to sit down at a table and to kind of go, okay, let's analyze the pros and cons. Let's determine what I need to be doing. It's the logical part of the brain. It's the analytical part of the brain. Those three brains don't work at the same speed. So if you take one thing away from the session today, know that even though you like to think that you're applying all of these three at the same time, you're not. The computer part is the first filter. Whenever we are confronted with something around us, the computer part is the part of the brain that essentially responds the fastest. It's in fact 20 times as fast as the human brain. So whenever we're confronting something, most of the time it happens, in fact, all of the time, it happens in an unconscious fashion. We first have a filter and say, have I seen this before? Have I experienced this before? Then we activate the chimp brain. And so the chimp brain is 5 times as fast as the human brain. So you can see the succession. First, the computer brain gets activated, then the chimp brain, and then the human brain. What that means is that we really need to be conscious how we are engaging others, how we are engaging our environment, and how do we make sense of what is happening around us. So let's drill a little bit deeper. Whenever something happens, and for example, right now, as you're listening to me, your neurons make connections. And if you like what you're hearing from me, then your neuron will start to make connections and they will start to remember what I said. And the more you hear concepts like this, the more they sort of arouse your curiosity, the more you're likely to make connections. But if, for example, for any reason you're not interested in what you're hearing, then you will disconnect. And next time that you're hearing something like this, you will disconnect your brain and you will not hear. Why am I bringing this up? Because our brain creates these strong synapses, connections over time. And that's why we get into the autopilot, where once we do something, we keep wanting to do it if it works for us. I'm bringing this up because if you think about the environment that we're in, turbulence, where there's new stuff thrown at us all the time, our brain, being a little bit lazy, wants to kind of dismiss all of it and just keep doing what we're doing. If we want to return stronger, we need to counter that in our brain. And we need to A, manage what is happening around us, and B, start to do new things. So bear with me, I'm gonna walk you through some ideas connected to that. The other part that you should know about your brain is that your brain is naturally wired to recognize threats at 5 times the rate of recognizing rewards. So when something turbulent, bad, difficult, different happens to us, our brain's response is to say, where's the threat? What do I need to do about it? And how do I protect myself? While that's a good human instinct and we should be worrying about that, think of it in terms of the amount of time that you spend in a day. You essentially are spending more time worrying about threat than you're worrying about opportunities. And that, as a business owner, it's a critical component of how you think about success. Success is not just done by managing threats. Success is best managed by thinking about opportunities. In that sense, what I want you to think about is, how do you create greater resilience? Because essentially the kind of the bad dynamic is that when we are more resilient, we're better able to assess opportunities. And when we're not, we are less able to do so. Why? Because when our brain is under stress, it really struggles to manage these 3 components that you see on the right-hand side of the slide. Our working memory, which is our ability to make connections in the moment and to remember the conversation that we had yesterday and to do the work that we need to be doing. Our long-term memory, which is all the stuff that is stored in our computer brain, and our ability to learn. When we are under stress, while stress is helpful in the moment and it's helpful to manage threat, over time, if the stress and the turbulence is prolonged, and if we don't manage it, what our brain does is to produce, to send messages to our adrenal gland to start producing all these hormones to make us work faster, to make us cope with that moment. But that's a momentary, it's supposed to be a momentary instant, one in which we are really, if you think of our animal part of us, where we're really concerned with survival. Over extended periods of time, being stressed all the time, it's not very helpful. Because what ends up happening is that we produce vasopressin, and over time, while vasopressin is helping us to get activated and going, it creates anger. It creates cortisol, which is helpful to drive attention, to get us, to make us aware. But over time, too much cortisol creates anxiety. And also it creates adrenaline, which is really helpful to activate the muscles, to make us work in a much more heightened way, especially when it comes to what our body was designed for, which is physical labor. Today, we don't do so much of that. What that does, too much adrenaline creates restlessness, which makes us not sleep, which inevitably creates more cortisol, more vasopressin, and you get the picture, right? The more time we focus just on threats, the more time our body produces these hormones, which are ultimately toxins in our body. So I got curious and I started to ask business leaders from the organizations that you see to the left. So across the world, I asked them, in the early part of the pandemic, I started to ask them, how are you dealing with things? What are you doing that's helping you stay sane? What's going on that's helping you versus what's going on that's not helping you? And one thing emerged really quickly from this series of interviews that I've done. And by the way, I'm continuing these interviews because as we go through the pandemic, some people are coping better than others. And so what was really apparent was that those that were best at coping with things were doing two things at once. They were focusing inward to how they were reacting to things, and they were keeping tabs of that. And they were also focusing outward to better understand how the rest of the world was managing this. And what was very apparent quickly was that those that were able to do this balance of inward and outward were more likely to have emotional balance, to stay motivated, to essentially embed new habits that were helpful, healthy, that were making them feel better about the world around them, which led to them to being more agile and more open, as opposed to closing in and thinking that the only way to deal with this was to retrench and struggle. They instead shifted to a model where they became more curious and they wanted to think through how they could manage this in a slightly different way. What this led us to, so bear with me because this seems a little bit complicated, so bear with me, it's simpler than it looks. What this led us to was to create a framework that essentially says, what are good behaviors? What are good things that you can do when you're going through turbulence? How do you counter the natural brain tendency that it has to just look at past experiences and find solutions through past experiences? And we've come to the agreement, I think, that past experiences may not necessarily help us all the time when we're going through turbulence. So what this model quickly told us was that good leaders were able to make sense of the situation, both internal and external. They were good at gathering intelligence. What that meant was they were good at checking in with themselves, be clear on when they were stressed out, why was that so, what was the threat that they were perceiving, and also kind of look at the outside world and kind of understand what was happening around them. So they would speak with their suppliers, they would speak with their clients, they would try to take stock and see how everyone else was coping with things and try to get a perspective on what others saw just around the corner. So they were actively engaged as opposed to closing in and worrying about themselves. They also shifted the way in which they made decisions. Instead of making kind of final decisions about everything, they instead kind of took time to test ideas and run experiments. So instead of betting everything on trying to return back to the old normal, they would do different things. And so, for example, here in the local environment, I've seen it quite a bit in the way, for example, that some restaurants have coped with things. Some of the restaurants just closed and it was terrible. Others instead went and tried to run experiments. They started to get themselves on some of the delivery websites. They started to cater to the local communities. They started to identify ways in which they could redesign their menus. They essentially attempted a number of experiments. Now, I think that there are some lessons that you can draw from your own business. How much time are you spending trying to protect your existing business versus which is the area of threat versus how much time you're instead spending identifying alternative opportunities and running experiments. The other thing that these leaders did, which was really good, was that they created transparency in their own organization. Instead of retrenching and not saying anything and just kind of hunkering down and put their heads down, they talked to their teams and they said, look, we're going to run some experiments. I need your help. I need you to be engaged. Here is what I want to do. Here is where I need your support. And in the process, as the arrow, the red arrow, the counterclockwise arrow that you see in the drawing means, was that they would get feedback from their team, they would refine their idea, they would run new experiments. It becomes a lot more engaging, and that provides also greater agility. The next step in the process, once they had engaged their teams, was to execute fast. And so run these experiments fast and try to get a sense quite quickly whether they were working or not. So if, for example, just changing the menu was not going to work, if working with the community, in the case of the restaurants, was not going to work, they would quickly determine that that wasn't going to work and try something else or tweak something about the experiment. And they would usually run 2 tracks. Mentally, they would run one track, which is, here is my business as usual. Here's what it's telling me. Here it's how it's doing, and here is these new experiments, these new ideas that I'm putting into action. And the last, the most critical part, they reflected on the learnings. They would spend time to just slow down. And slow down does not mean spending days and days, but just creating the mental space to close the door and reflect on what was happening, on what has happened, to determine whether they would change something, whether they would change something about themselves. Maybe they hadn't been so good at communicating with others. Maybe they hadn't been so good at executing fast. But essentially creating the mental space to say, all right, what did I do good and what is that I need to improve? So with that, that can be a lot. So I want to give you some thoughts on things that you can do practically, and some that you can do by yourself, and some that you can do with your teams. So I'll start with the 5 neuroscience-based actions that you can take today. Number 1, engage people who think differently from you. A big tendency that we have during times of turbulence is to surround ourselves with people who think like us. What happens if we surround ourselves with people who think like us? We see less opportunity, right? Because we all look at the world in different ways. And if we surround ourselves with people who have the same thoughts, then there's a whole blind spot that we have around what other opportunities may be. So there's comfort. Our brain likes to engage with people who think like us, because guess what? It reinforces what it's known all the time. It reinforces the way that it thinks. But at times of turbulence, we need people who are different from us. Set a long-term goal. If you're struggling with staying motivated, if you're struggling with staying focused, focus on something that really matters to you. And it does not have to apply to work. It could apply with your family, your own health, a hobby that you have. But have something that gets you out of the rut of just focusing on things second by second, to give your brain this plasticity that allows it to also create new neural cells, where you're essentially focusing on stuff that can give you more pleasure and not just focused on the threat. Find a space for recovery and reflection. I really commend both Robert and Anna-May for finding a space where they are at peace, where they have the opportunity to engage with nature or do something that they love. It's really important. It's a well-known fact that if we can replace at least one unhealthy snack with a healthy one, we are giving our body the opportunity to process and manage the toxins in a slightly different way. So the temptation that I have myself is to go for the burger, to go for the fries, because they give you pleasure in the moment. They don't help you when it comes to your brain and to your ability to manage all the stress. And finally, do it with me. Take a deep breath at least every hour. Your brain needs oxygen, and that's one side. It helps to combat all the toxins in our body. So the more oxygen we breathe in, the better it is. It also helps with the way in which our heart manages flow of blood in our body. And one way to overcome the fact that we get so much in the moment, set an alarm every hour to take a deep breath. Do it again with me. If you lead a team, there are also some actions that you can take. And they go back to this concept of VUCA. In volatile situations, become reliable. As the world goes crazy around us, remember what Mr. Rogers said, find the helpers, be the helper. So be reliable, be there. People will appreciate it, and that will create greater trust. So if you say you're going to do something, I know that during volatile times, it's easy to say, hey, this happened, I have to change. Find ways to be reliable. And transparency in the way in which we communicate, being able to tell others, this is what I'm struggling with, creates greater trust and allows for more collaboration, because others may have a solution to a problem that you have, but if you don't express it, they won't know. In terms of thinking about how we manage uncertainty, invest in people, be trustworthy, and so keep teams engaged, involve others. I kind of spoke to this quite a bit, but speak to be understood. One of the things that our brain does is create shortcuts also in our communication patterns. And so if we're not making ourselves clear, it will be difficult for others to gain certainty and clarity from what's around us. In complex situations, be direct. There is already enough complexity that if we add to it by creating too many options, for example, by making life difficult for those around us with more steps for something to be done, find ways of streamlining things and engage others in that more direct communication. And the last piece is be understandable in ambiguous situation. When we are going through challenging times, through turbulent times, having a clear goal that your team can relate to and telling them, hey, we're gonna try to manage the present, but we're also trying to build new ways of doing things. That can give them clarity around the fact, for example, even though it seems more complicated, it gives them clarity around the fact that there are two options that need to be pursued, and they can kind of understand where they fit in and where they can contribute. And ultimately, be agile in your thinking. If you get stuck and if you focus on threat, you will know that the brain essentially wants to trick you into using your autopilot. Running experiments instead. That way you will force your brain to be more agile, to be more connected with what is changing around you, as opposed to kind of following the autopilots. And with that, I'm going to stop, say thank you, and take any questions that you may have. My email address is there. Feel free to reach out to me.
Excellent. Thank you, Joe. That was a great presentation. Please post in the chat or in the Q&A if you have questions. We got some time with Joe that we can answer some questions. Joe, I did want to share that Paul in the Q&A box mentioned his turbulence and his coping mechanism. And he said turbulence and chaos are originating from the uncertainty of the future. For example, will international business travel be easier or more difficult in the future? And his coping mechanism is doing yoga and mindfulness practices, as well as exercising in the gym and hiking. So,
Paul, you're 20 steps ahead of many of us in that front. So congratulations on taking such good care of yourself. The question that you have around international business travel will be easier or more difficult in the near future. That's a great question. I think that there is a desire in many parts of the world to create this safe corridors, i.e. nations that are able to manage the pandemic better, that are trying to find ways of staying connected and facilitating travel. So I would imagine that for those countries that are able to do that, that are able to manage the numbers, it will become increasingly easier. There is also, and so that part I think will determine whether international travel will be easier or not. There is also obviously more technology that it's being deployed, which I think will offer ways to solve this issue, from quick testing to managing quarantine better when in country. I think that there are lots of different things that will take place. In the near future, my sense is that we will still be going through quite a bit of challenges for the, in my opinion, until the spring. Even though the issue may not be the mortality rate of the virus, the challenge is when you have large numbers of people that require hospitalization. That's where the challenge really lies with the current pandemic. And so if we're not able to manage that, if we're not able to manage how long people sit in a hospital and the challenges that that creates to healthcare systems, I think that we will be stuck for a while longer.
Joe, I have a
That
question.
answers your question. Yeah, go ahead, Robert.
So one of the things I've seen, in my life, I've seen it in my kids and in others, is we oftentimes get stressed and focus on things that we have absolutely no control over.
Mm-hmm.
How can we deal with that, especially going into this holiday season, going into 2021?
Yeah.
There's lots of turbulence on things we can't control at all. How can we cope with that and not spend our brain power, our energy on that, and focus it on other things that are more productive?
Well, I'm going to give you this answer in two ways. I'm going to give you the answer for those that have a sophisticated brain that you can engage in a more intellectual exercise, and those that are instead more instinctive in nature. And I would categorize teenagers and young adults as being the latter rather than the former. So for me, it's a two-step thing. For those around us where we can have a healthy conversation, it's just a question, and I would argue in our offices, we should be having a conversation around what we can control versus what we can't, and have plans for both. Being clear on what are we going to do about the stuff that we can control? How do we incorporate it in our plan of action versus what are we going to do about the stuff that we cannot control? And are there ways that we can control it through groups? For example, I'm thinking, for example, in your case, Robert, if I were one of the small businesses in Arizona, I'd be going, how do I stay engaged with the Arizona Commerce Authority? Because they may have tools to help us collectively manage the turbulence as a group. And so it's kind of figuring out where in that continuum can control extend, and knowing what you can versus what you cannot control. For those of us that are less rational, that are more instinctive, that are more prone to gut responses, then the point is, how do you direct the attention away from threat towards reward? And so how do we incent them to take the right behaviors? How do we shift them away from feeling frustrated, angry for what is happening to us, onto essentially, in a simple way, making lemonade out of lemons? What are the mechanisms that we can use to help them see that there is good lemonade that can be made from the lemons? I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, thank you. All right, anybody else have any questions for Joe? We got a few minutes left. We got some thank yous, appreciate those. If no one else has questions, type those in if you do, but if they don't, we'll go ahead and start to wrap up. Joe, do you have any final closing thoughts you'd like to share?
Yeah, I would really like for if I were in your shoes right now and I'm running my small business or I'm part of a project, I would really like for you to, if I were in your shoes, I would really like to spend time to understand what motivates myself, but also be clear on what motivates those around us. We like to think that we're in this pandemic all together, and we are, but each one of us is living it differently. Each one of us has their own challenges, whether it's kids or whether it is an elderly person that we are taking care of, whether it is the fact that some of us, I think to myself, my big challenge right now is that I cannot travel to Italy to go and see my mom. Each one of us has different challenges that they are confronting. And so if you manage a team, be clear on what is the individual challenge that everyone is going through, and think through, how can I make this period better for them? How can I make it better for myself? So that's my last thought for thinking through what you should be doing this next 2 months. Understand what everyone's own challenges and motivations look like as we go into the next year.
Excellent. Thank you, Joe. We appreciate your insight and your expertise and your comments. Again, for all the attendees, if you want to go back and watch this, it is being recorded and the slide deck will be available. So those 5 takeaways that Joe shared, we can share those with everyone. And so we look forward to seeing everybody on Thursday. Until then, Thursday 9 a.m. we have our next session. Until then, everybody have a great day, and we will talk to you soon. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Robert. Thank you, Lisa.